to word it that way. Otherwise, we can all go for a break while you read it. No, I'm just kidding.
What's the shorter recommendation?
You can basically say, I'll bring forward the motion as recommended in the package.
I will bring forward the motion as recommended in the package.
Do we have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Cross? Any further discussion on the motion? Really straightforward. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sturgeon, for your time and for this. We're going to move on to 11C, which is we have a presentation regarding application in principle for a hotel at RMO. Ms. Wade and Mr. Sturgeon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Good afternoon. Before you today is the proposed development permit application for 2599, 2999, and 3124 Camosi Road, a proposed 158-room hotel and conference center. Today, this report is before you. Staff wants to systematically advance the project of the proposed hotel and conference center to advance it moving forward in our processing within our department. The recommendations in this report undertake an interim review of the project. And this report allows for council to have a discussion on the proposed DP for the hotel and conference center and provide some direction to the applicant and to staff within the legislation guidelines that regulate development permit areas. And we wanted to do this prior to finalizing the report for council's consideration. We felt this would be an opportunity to have a discussion as to where we are in the process. So first of all, I want to let me see. Bear with me. I got to get the right tools.
So Ms. Wade, I just want to confirm, is this 158 or 185? For some reason, I thought I've seen both numbers.
158, as far as I know. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. So we just put forward an agenda for you today to just run through the resort master plan, do a little refresher on that, the authority around development permits and the scope, and then location and context, proposal overview, application summary, and sort of a description rationale for recommendations. So I thought I would start off first where we are with the actual resort master plan. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about is with the existing resort master plan from 2003. In this was a MDA that was created between the resort and the province. And within the MDA, it outlines the jurisdictions of private lands and crown lands. And on the private lands, these are referred to as development areas. And those development areas, as they move forward in the discussion to where we are today, in section 2.03 of the MDA, there is a request for the developer to reach out to the city of Revelstoke and have an agreement about how those lands could be incorporated under the OCP zoning bylaws and those regulations. And the province actually acknowledged that those lands would be under the jurisdiction of the city of Revelstoke, and they asked for that agreement to come into play by a certain timeline. So I'll just give you the high level of how this sort of moved forward, is that there was discussions about moving the lands that were in the private lands that were in the CSRD, and under Section 13 of the Local Government Act, there's a request and a resolution between the CSRD and the City of Revelstoke to move forward with an agreement about the City of Revelstoke actually managing the planning and servicing of these lands, and that moved forward into the annexation, and those agreements were struck. So the background is that the private lands are under the jurisdiction of the City of Revelstoke, and as such was evolved into an OCP amendment and a zoning bylaw that created the CD zoning for this, which had a range of permitted uses that aligned with the resort's master plan agreement, and it allowed flexibility. So I just wanted to outline that as the background. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, and if you remember in our little council orientation, I talked about the jurisdictions and the hierarchy of approval. It's important to note that this MDA is under the provincial legislation, and as such, we as the city of Revelstoke cannot, we can give comments to the province, but it's between the province and the resort what that MDA update looks like. So in regards to that, what has happened is back in September 2017, the province actually came and talked about the updating of the resort to the council of the day and gave that background. And then subsequent to that, we received an application a year ago for the development, the proposed development permit for the hotel and conference center. And then the developer went to the province to notify, because under their requirements in the MDA, they have to notify the province that that's their intent, that they want to build this on those lands within their MDA. But the province then acknowledges under section 3.02 that the jurisdiction actually lies with us, but their requirements under the master development agreement is to notify. So all that process has been followed. Council of the previous day had a report, June 2018. Those comments were made and went to the province. Those have been incorporated by the resort into their planning process and the province. So that process is going on in the background as we are meeting today, and as Peter Nielsen had talked about earlier in his presentation. So what we wanted to actually talk to, and I'm going to just go here, is this is the 2017 updated master plan. And I wanted to just highlight those red lands or crown lands. Those sort of turquoisey green lands are private lands held by the resort. And this is where we would be looking at our jurisdiction for overseeing the OCP zoning bylaw amendment on those lands. Within the OCP, within the MDA, the resort, and I believe Peter Nielsen actually referred to this as well, is they have the ability to move around their developments because it's a conceptual plan, and improving out where things can exist with riparian and other regulations that they have to follow under their environmental management plan, and working with the province, they have the ability and flexibility to move around their proposed developments and also to respond to the market as well, which is what we're in the process of doing right now. So if the lands have a riparian issue or some sensitivities, they must deal with the province with that and deal with how those would move around. If they're on our private lands, again, they fall under our development guidelines for this area as well, because this is a designated development permit area as per the CD zoning. So I just wanted to outline that so that we understand the difference between the crown lands, the private, who has jurisdiction. We've been in conversation with the province and with the resort, and we're all working collaboratively on this and exchanging information. But one of the key things to this is that in order for the province to have to approve something, it would have to be a substantial change, and there's 4 criteria. Most importantly is increasing the bed units or removing a lift. And to the best of our understanding, that is not happening. So the province is in a position where they would work with the updated plans. I understand the resort is providing the information as requested, and we're going to be meeting with the resort on that tomorrow and having a conversation to see what all our comments have been. But the long and short of what I'm saying is that the province is in the process of receiving an update from the resort, and that they would have to formally accept it at the end of this update. But I just wanted to make sure there was an understanding between acceptance and approval. So that would be
Councilor Yonker, do you have a question at this point?
Yes, Your Worship, if Ms. Wade is okay with that.
Sure.
Ms. Wade, thank you for the explanation there so far. Two questions, just one more because you had mentioned this. So, my understanding, I heard you correctly then, you were stating that the resort has the rights to move buildings within their entire MDA zone unless it's considered a major change by the province. But when you said that, you said increasing bed units?
So I didn't use major.
Okay, sorry.
So there's 4 criteria that are laid out in the MDA.
Okay.
It's associated with the parameters that, and one of them is if you were to go over, the resort was to make a request to double their bed units from what they're approved to do.
Okay.
That would be different.
Okay.
And then if they decided that they were going to remove a lift,
Right.
that would affect the amount of bed units they could actually produce.
Okay, so it was the total approved bed units, which I believe is like 16 now.
Yeah, and
something.
that's not changing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor Elliott.
The MDA had some flexibility built into it. The CD zone is equal to that. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it's matching.
And we'll go through that in a little more detail later too for you to clarify.
Councilor Brooks Hill, you have a question at this point?
You mentioned the difference between accepting and approving, and I missed that. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, sure. Your Worship, to Councilor Brooks Hill. So what the difference is that in what's laid out, the 4 criteria in the MDA, those are considered things that would trigger to have to approve the master plan. And that is the increasing the bed units, so doubling the bed units, taking away the lift and reducing it, and there's a couple more, I can't remember those, but those are the 2 major ones. And so if those trigger, then that would trigger having to approve the plan. But they have the ability in their MDA to actually move around the pieces because it is conceptual and flexible, and it's supposed to actually work with the market conditions and what's going on with that time of, like, if there's more recreational opportunities, and if there's, when they do their detailed planning, if there's more issues in regards to environmental. So it's those sorts of things that allows that flexibility to move around basically the monopoly pieces.
So, Ms. Wade, my understanding is when there's a revision of the plans, the MDA or the revision is accepted, it doesn't need to be approved.
My understanding from the province right now is that's the process that the resort seems to be going into. It's an update that they are doing, and then it doesn't trigger one of the 4 conditions. And my understanding is that they would be the acceptance of it rather than an approval because they haven't triggered the 4 criteria.
Great, thank you. I'll let you carry on your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So, development permits. I just wanted to highlight the development permits. And so this is a development permit area, and it is Area H, and it is resort lands. And this was created through the OCP amendment and the zoning bylaw, and it outlines in the OCP what this is as far as a development permit area. And under the Local Government Act in Part 14, Division 4, the city can create development permits areas for specific reasons, and they are natural environment, ecosystems, and biological diversity, and protection of development from hazardous conditions, and establishment objectives for form, character of commercial and multifamily residential development. So those are the guidelines that we are following in processing this application. And we, under the Local Government Act, have to follow processing it on this. It does not affect, we cannot look at this in the terms of land use or density. So these are our guiding legislative guidelines that we have to follow to review the process. And there's a whole pile of things under all these little 3 points that we have to follow, and that's the process we're in at this point in time. Any changes that we would make to any of the conditions of a development permit must be within the scope of these guidelines. So I'm just trying to outline that there's a legislature procedure, and we can only change and address these 3 items within our development permit, which is what we are in the process of doing.
Okay.
So now I'm going to hand it over to Daniel, and he's going to walk through the actual application and the zoning, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in my report, there's a lot of details on this. Rather than try to cover those off, all of them, I don't think that's going to be possible here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give an overview of the location and the context, and then I'm going to walk through how the structure is situated on the site, because I don't know that it comes through clearly when you're looking at all the elevations and the pictures about what that building might actually look like. So I'm going to walk through that, and then Mary Ann's going to finish up. So there will be lots of time for questions at the end about some of the specifics that are discussed in the report, rather than trying to cover them all off right now. So we all know where this is. It's directly across from Camosi, directly across Camosi Road from the existing base of the resort. And that lot is outlined right there. That's about a 2.5 acre lot. Sorry, I'm going to switch between metric and imperial here. It's 170 meters long and 58 meters wide. So that works out to just over 1 hectare of land. It's steeply sloped as it drops away from Camosi Road. There's currently a retaining wall that effectively holds up Camosi Road that's within the city's right-of-way. And there's a very, obviously, steep vertical drop from that, and then the land tapers towards the west, where you can see there's these existing houses right here. We call that Thomas Brook. And on those lots, the slope tapers off a little bit, but they do drop about 4 or 5 meters from the east side to the west side. Apologies here. North of the site, we have the existing day-use parking areas. There's a helicopter landing facility here that the resort currently uses. There's also some continuation of the slope right here. South of the site, we have Turtle Creek, which we talked about earlier. That flows under Camosi Road and then takes a bit of a jog here and then carries on to a culvert. The property where the creek crosses over is also owned by the resort, as is the lands up here. This one on the corner here that's a regular shape, that's a privately owned residential property, as are all these privately owned residential properties up here. And as Mary Ann just talked about, we've got resort ownership up here mixed with Crown tenure farther on up the hill. Briefly, the OCP designation is called Revelstoke Mountain Resort. That applies to all this light green area right here. The lands over here, which are again called Thomas Brook, those were annexed into the city in 2016. Through the annexation process, the city de facto adopts the CSRD's bylaws. So those bylaws that are in place there for the OCP are labeled as RR2. So they, at the time of their adoption, anticipated a rural type character with large lots. And jumping over to the zoning mirrors that. So we still have the CSRD's RR2 zoning here, which limits lot size and use to single family residences and 2 acre lots. Outside of that, we have the CD08 zone, which was just talked about. And that zone is broken up into various different neighborhoods and cores. This area is Resort Core 1. I can't read that number right there, but this is one of the neighborhoods, and this is another neighborhood. And as I stated in the report, that was intended to somewhat align with the resort master plan from 2003 to identify sort of core-based facilities and larger scale commercial, and then outside of that, hotels, residences, and smaller neighborhood scale commercial. So in the zone, we've got a lot of uses, permitted uses that are listed that align with those core areas and with the neighborhood areas. Proposal, I'm going to back up and just mention one more thing. On the front page of your report, you'll note that there's 3 addresses. 2955 is the address of the subject site, as I'm calling it. The 3124 is a parcel immediately north that holds the parking lots, and it's a technical term called hooked. It's hooked to this parcel over here, so those are the same piece of land from a subdivision point of view. That's part of the application to accommodate some landscaping that's going to go up here. And the 2999 is the lands that Thomas Brook cuts across. That's another parcel which is also under resort ownership, so that's included in the application to be able to include landscaping in that area right there. So the terms of the development permit that we're talking about would also apply to portions of those lands as you see them in the drawing packages. I've listed off more or less what the proposal entails here. So we've got a mixed-use multi-story building that's up to 8 stories and includes 158 hotel rooms. It also includes all the facilities that go with the hotel. So you've got your lobby area, your reception. They're including a spa. There's a kitchen that goes with it. Their offices, they've got ski storage and all the passageways and corridors and everything. They're also including a conference center that's spread out over 2 levels, and that includes a number of meeting and banquet rooms. There's a restaurant that would be open to the public. A few retail spaces that are included in there. They're of a smaller size. I can't recall, I'm sorry if there's 2 or 3 of them, but they're limited in size individually by the zoning bylaw. Underneath all of this, there's 2.5 stories of parking, totaling 209 stalls. And we've also got accommodation for a future overhead walkway that would connect from this hotel over to the plaza at the Sutton Place. That in itself will require a separate development permit application along with a number of legal agreements that would have to be undertaken. We're looking at airspace parcels, easements, and several other development permit items to make the connections and legal agreements between the resort and the city. And the landscaping, which I just mentioned, which would include portions of the parcels to the north and the south. Just a high-level site plan. I mentioned in the report that it covers 42% of the site, so I'm referring to the parcel here outlined in red. This is a combination of 2 graphics here, and I wanted to just include the riparian areas down here over which Turtle Creek crosses, and then there's an additional portion of that parcel down here. The building, as I stated in the report, there's no setbacks in this zone, nor is there any maximum site coverage. So the building is positioned as what we call a 0 lot line over here and a 0 lot line over here. And I believe it was their intent to obviously move the building as far away as they could for their design from this lot line over here in these residences. This is a service road which will drop rather steeply down this hill here, accessing a delivery and loading area over here. And this is a hammerhead turnaround so that those trucks can get back out. What you're seeing right here is an exposed surface parking area. That is the lowest part of the building, so to speak. They're calling this a 2-story portion, and this is a 6-story portion. The 2-story portion is nearly as tall as the 6-story portion, as they've used considerably overheight ceilings in that area, whereas the ceilings in the 6-story area are in the 8 and 9 foot range. And over here we have the port cochere, so this would be a one-way in and one-way out where they would receive buses and hotel check-in. Over here, this is an entrance to the parking garage, and then of course the service delivery entrance right there. I'm going to run through what the actual structure looks like in terms of its, I've mentioned a varied facade and articulation. So from looking at it from Camosi Road, you've got your 6 stories that are referred to here and your 2 over here. And then Camosi Road drops off and you've got your parking entrance over here. This section right here is set back farther from you if you were looking at the hotel, whereas this is right on the road. This is standing north of the site, looking at the port cochere right there, the conference center, and then the hotel behind it. So you can start to see some of the articulation that they've built into it. So this portion is set back. You've got the entrance right here, and then this larger portion is sitting behind it. From the other angle, looking to the north, this is where the parking area is. So cars would enter off Camosi Road, go through the parkade, do the swing around, and then enter up here and park in this open area. So the conference center is farther behind, and the hotel is closer. And here we get a profile of the walkway that would connect over here with the existing buildings. Looking at it from the back, you can see the full mass of the structure. This is set farther away, and this is set closer. This wall across here is continuous in terms of its distance to the neighboring property line. That's 17 meters from the property line to that wall. And then this here extends over with the port cochere beyond. This is something that we asked for from the applicant to try to understand the separation between land uses. This is Camosi Road up here near port cochere. And then the service delivery area right here They're proposing a graded slope dropping down to the property line, and then this is the neighboring house. I've put 3 of these in the presentation to try to, again, illustrate the sort of how the building is arranged in terms of its physical parts. So that's the farthest north version. So you're looking at the conference center right there. As I go to the next one, you can see the hotel. And then there's a portion of the building that has the full depth of the hotel and the conference center. And then lastly, this is the last cross section at the farthest southern end. You've got the hotel, and then there's a parking garage here again. So I'm happy to answer a couple questions if there is any about the massing right now. Otherwise,
Councillor Cross?
Just go back one slide, please, Mr. Strickland. Oh, not one more, sorry. Okay, so can you help me understand the scale here? What's the distance from the bottom, the property line on the house here at the back? I think I know where that is. Can you use your highlighter and show me where that is? Right here, yes, exactly. What's the distance from that point to the service road at the back there?
I'd have to verify the width of the service road. The distance from the property line to this wall is 17 meters. I don't know that exact number right there.
Yeah.
The width of the road is likely in the neighborhood of 4 meters.
Right.
So you're probably looking at a 13-meter distance. And I'm estimating here, but that's probably a 13-meter difference.
So that's roughly 40 feet and 60 feet in total. Roughly.
13 times 3, yes, slightly over 40 feet.
Yeah, approximately 40 and 60. Okay, thank you.
So, as I said, I've not detailed any of the particulars. The one thing I will point out here is that there's this slope here changes as you go through these cross sections.
Yeah.
So, as you move from north to south, the subject site has a bit of a cross fall, and so there's more elevation to be taken up at the north end than there is at the south end. But they've graded the service road at the back level, so that results in a slope that changes in steepness as you move across the site. So some of the conditions that you've noted that we've included here is to try to get some clarity around what impact this slope has and how we're going to deal with some tree retention and drainage issues on that. So I just wanted to draw attention to what those conversations are about.
Okay.
With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Marianne.
Thanks, Daniel. So to date, we had received some letters after the council agenda cutoff, which I believe we'll be dealing with later. And then in your package, there's also letters that we've received to date from the consultation that the resort had undertaken. And I also wanted to just highlight when Daniel was talking about the slope and the vegetation. So part of the requirements for studies that's outlined in our design guidelines asks for the riparian area assessment. It asks for stormwater management, noise impact, and these sorts of things. And we draw these back to in the zoning and in our guidelines. These are itemized in there as things that we need to further do our analysis. And so we've been working with the resort on that, and so we're finalizing those reports with them, and we'll be meeting with them to discuss that further, to make sure there's clear understanding on what is outstanding. And that's why the report is coming to you as a request for receiving the applicant in principle. Understanding we're finalizing these and we bring them back. And the reason why is that these will dictate some of the requirements that we need to put into the development permit as part of the conditions of that development permit. So we're at an interim position right now, and been working with the resort and the province to have dialogue and collaboration to resolve any of the issues we need to finalize on the design guidelines that are dictated in our zoning. So we're following legislative process. And so the reason for being here today is to have a discussion, and so that the council knows where we're at, where we're going in the process, And we welcome any comments you might have of us and hope we can provide some clarification.
So, Ms. Wade, I just want to make a couple comments before councillors weigh in. So, my understanding with this is that this is being brought to us. It's within our OCP and our zoning bylaws. They're not changing bylaw, or they're not changing zoning. It's already zoned for this. And under their current master development agreement, even though these are privately held lands and they can build on them as they see fit, it's still under that master development agreement as they have requested, and they can move them around like monopoly pieces on there as they see is best going to be utilized. And so one of the reasons for not building to the north was because of the riparian area and the wetlands, and so they've chosen this area going forward. And because this is under our current process with development permits, it's in the correct zoning, it's properly done under the OCP, we accept this and try to move it forward because they're meeting all the criteria. The only other criteria they have to meet is the things that you're asking for. And if they meet all those things, then at that point, development permit can be issued. It would come to council to approve that development permit before they could go forward. Am I correct on that?
I think you've done a very good summary of that. Absolutely.
Great. Mr. Sturgeon.
I just wanted to point out that, of course, Peter Nielsen is here, but they also have their architect here who may be able to answer questions if something of a technical nature arises that we're not able to answer.
Great. Appreciate that, Ms. White.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just wanted to also point out that we have also been in discussion with the resort and with the province about the employee housing, and that our understanding is that with this proposed development permit for the hotel, that triggers the resort looking at employee housing, and I believe they've been having a conversation with the province as well. Yes, we're right there, and unless the applicant wants to, but that's my understanding.
Okay. Councillor Yonker, you have a question about that because Mr. Nielsen said we're not at that point that they're going to go ahead and build this employee housing because it doesn't. We're not at that threshold. That was our understanding as a council this afternoon. In Mr. Nielsen's words, we're gonna go ahead with this housing, even though we don't have to build it at this point. We haven't reached that.
That's
and so, and then further to that, councillors, my understanding is that this hotel project still counts towards their total bed count on the mountain as well.
That's right. So, thank you for correcting me because I used the wrong word. So I apologize.
So is anyone else have some questions or comments that you would like, Councillor Yonkers?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe there's going to be lots of questions, so are we doing one at a time? Or
one at a time, please.
My first question then, actually, if we're able to, I'm not sure who the architect is. Sir, question, are you able to answer the exact distance between the service road and the property line?
Not without actually looking at the drawings. I think Daniel's assessment was pretty accurate.
Okay. All right.
So, Councillor, I'll just ask you to direct your questions to me. Everyone in the room can hear you, and that way I can see who's doing it. And if you're asking your questions and addressing your fellow councillors, then everyone else is going to understand where you're getting at. Is there Councillor Charlotte?
Your Worship, I'm curious about the process in dealing with the noise issue with the property being so close. Reading through the report, quite a few pages to read it, I may have missed it. It looks to be focusing more on tree coverage and landscaping in order to create that buffer zone. And I'm wondering if there was any discussion over walls or something more solid that would be, in my mind, more effective of dealing with that noise coming from a loading zone.
Mr. Sturgeon, do you care to weigh in on that?
There's two parts of that mitigation. There's the visual side and then there's the sound side. So there's the visual side we anticipated being dealt with through landscaping. The sound side, the applicant offered to restrict the loading hours.
Right.
We were going to build that into a restrictive covenant. Additionally, we've asked for this noise impact assessment, which would lead to further information over whether something like a wall or a sound barrier would even make a difference. I mean, there's a possibility, speculating, but there's a possibility you put a wall up and then the sound echoes and actually amplifies itself.
Right.
And then reaches out, or maybe it will contain it. So we're going to leave that up to a professional that would recommend to us what those sounds might be and what the mitigation might be.
Just a quick follow-up on that. As much as I appreciate loading times can be restricted, employee times cannot.
Right.
So in a restaurant, in my experience in restaurants, the loading zone is typically the smoking zone for staff as well. That's where they're allowed to go outside and have their cigarettes outside of the view of guests. So that will be outside of those loading zones and should be a part of any noise review.
Right. That's a good point with that. And I think I had someone bring up to me about parking fans, noise because there's fans in underground parking. I don't know if is there noise associated with that or not noise. And all I'm thinking about now is forgive me for this, but a high-powered bathroom fan where you can't hear yourself, sort of thing. So those are questions that I'm just asking. I don't know how that's dealt with.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, those are all items that we can discuss with the applicant. And we have already discussed the noise mitigation done by a professional. And we are happy to take that back and talk with the applicant about that.
Councillor Cross.
Your Worship, through you, Ms. Wade, has there been any city consultation with the property most impacted there? That is the Bowen property. Has there been any direct consultation with this family?
I'm going to have to defer a little bit to Mr. Surgeon because we've been here 3 days.
I'm aware.
Yeah. So, do you want to speak to that?
We've had a few emails received from the Bowens, and we have incorporated as many of their comments as we can into our consideration of this as it stands right now.
And is it, so emails but no direct face-to-face meetings?
No, there's not been any face-to-face meetings.
And just on that line, so as you know, they've written a very eloquent and long letter with 9 salient points as to why this shouldn't go forward, or at least not go forward this fast. And I'm just wondering, I want to zero in on the OCP aspect because this is in our jurisdiction. We do have an OCP. I understand it's the zoning. It seems to me that at the very least, our zoning doesn't actually match the words in the OCP when I read it. And I'd like your take on the OCP and the zoning, and are they in conflict?
The OCP is triggered when the zoning itself is amended. So legislation requires that if a bylaw is adopted that is contrary to the OCP, then the OCP also has to be amended itself. The requirements set forth in the OCP take effect when a bylaw is for consideration. So those consultation requirements that are laid out in the OCP are not applicable to development permits. They're applicable to when we're reconsidering the land uses within the broader area that resort lands designation encompasses.
So if, ma'am, yeah, Your Worship. Yeah. So I want to be logical here because for me this is just a tragedy of good things happening and bad unintended consequences, right? And I see 2 things I'm very concerned about in terms of fairness. One is this Bowen property being impacted so much by such a large structure that I believe in my heart they did not, when they bought the property, anticipate they had to be so thorough in analyzing the nuances of municipal law and zoning. So that's a tragedy, part A. And I see another tragedy. I see RMR who wants to get going. We're being asked to approve in principle. So how long does this in principle process mean? Because my experience with development permits, albeit limited, suggests that a development permit is always contingent on meeting the things we're listing in here. So why are we gating it twice? I mean, does council not have the option to actually approve the development permit and RMR is still bound by these other conditions and covenants to meet them? So what is the point of in principle?
Through Your Worship, I will try to address those comments. So first off, under the design guidelines, that they lay out, they refer to reports and processes, other levels of government that we have to adhere to, in particular the riparian areas regulation. So in order for us and to say that that report has met that requirement, we need to have this report, and that report could impact what we have to bring forward to council. So that might mean things like defining where the SPIA is and putting a no disturb belt, and we need to have that actually surveyed by a BCLSA, like a surveyor. So there's a few little pieces that we need, and they have to be technical. And that's why we need the technical information to be able to come back to council and say, here it is technically.
Okay, so
So just before you carry on, if I understand correctly,
thank you.
when we're dealing with these sort of things, so we're dealing with it in principle, they come back with a report. So the final footprint, as it where it exactly goes on the property, may change if some of the reports say you need to change it, whether it's the riparian report or whether it's the geotech report or whatever. So coming in principle saying that we're going to approve this in principle, but coming with the development permit will basically say, okay, all the reports are in, this is exactly where it's going to go, right here. So that's kind of the process. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct, Your Worship. The idea is that we have to be technically correct and have to have the technical information to put in the development permit. And that is under the Local Government Act and how we do that.
I understand that, but I've never seen or heard anybody I talked to has ever heard this in principle thing. Like, I think everything you told me still applies to a normal development permit, leaving out the in principle.
Okay, Mr. Chabot's...
Yeah, I'm just going to try to help council understand the requirement for these reports and the requirement for this to come back to council again later. Because probably you've seen other development permits have been issued subject to conditions. They weren't approved in principle. They were, okay, you get your permit after you do this. Well, doing this was a fairly factual-based item that didn't confer a discretion. And whereas in the case of the reports that we're asking for with respect to this application, I think they'll come back and there'll be a fair degree of discretion that could be incorporated either in permit conditions or not, such as, is that enough trees, or should you do more trees or larger trees, or here's a host of noise mitigation measures, but they have impacts and costs to development and varying degrees of success. What would be acceptable to the council in terms of the consideration of approving the permit? And so you can't delegate the discretion to make those types of determinations respecting permit conditions to staff. Those are considerations that probably have to be made by the council. And so that's why they will come back. And why it's approval in principle, I think we all know that this is a change from the original master plan back in 2003 in land use. And although it was included and identified in the April 2018 submission to the province as a site for a hotel, I think if I were the resort and the applicant, I'd want some degree of comfort that my application would generally be supported if only I satisfy these things before I do these things, which are not likely to be without expense.
Good. Councilor Yonkers.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship, and Mr. Chabot for answering there. I'm still struggling, though. I understand what Mr. Chabot is saying, but I just look at, speaking just with Councillor Elliott and looking, I've done lots of digging and researching here with development permits across municipalities across BC here, and I understand what you're saying in regards to, there might be some discretion and some disagreement here, but correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there other development permits in town then that have not even been brought because there's still discretion in staff's opinion about those permits prior to being brought here? Does that
Maybe there's applications for development permits that I'm not familiar that are still within in-house planning. There's always a process of meeting with an applicant and of discussing and fine-tuning and negotiating. I mean, this application was made, I don't know, was it made at the end of 2017 or beginning of 2018? So I mean, it's been the subject of in-house negotiation and, well, we need this in supporting our application for well over a year now.
So to that point then, as a council then, should we expect then that all development permits are going to now be approved in principle in order to delegate these things to staff then? If that's what you're, if that's
No,
what I'm
I wouldn't
understanding?
be delegating anything to staff. I think it's in light of the fact that this one has additional requirements. This is a big development. This isn't a single office building with retail downtown on a small lot.
Okay.
Right? Mr. Nielsen noted this is a $20 to $30 million bill. It needs to be gone about more carefully. And you know what, legally speaking, in principle doesn't mean a whole lot. I think as a promise to the community and the resort, it means something. And council's indication needs to be seriously considered, that if you do indicate you're supporting it in principle, although that has no legal effect, it does mean that your intention is if they satisfy the necessary requirements, you'll approve the permit.
Right, okay. Okay.
Councilor Sherlock.
So if I'm to understand this correctly, our decision today is looking at, are these conditions that are being requested stringent enough to allay any current concerns with this development permit? So if our concerns are mainly about noise mitigation, then these reports should allay that at a later date. So we're approving in principles less these bits. If that makes sense?
Yes and no. Yes, on the yes side, yep, we're approving without those reports. Second to that, is it stringent enough? These are the reports that are required under the development permit.
Yeah.
Under normal builds that are required whenever we're building a building. So when we're talking about a nearby waterway, we need a repairing report. When we're talking about a steep hill, we might need that geotech report and whatever else is in there about all those dedicated things. Is it stringent enough? It's the requirements that are met by the builder according to our bylaws and according to the building code. Is that correct?
So, yes, so the design guidelines lay out very clearly what are the technical requirements and the analysis that we need to go through with those reports and come back and say, in the report and in the development permit, saying these are the conditions of the development permit. So if the noise mitigation study comes back and says a wall has to be up, then that becomes a condition in the development permit. And I'm just using very simple examples. Is that clarify that? Or
Does that make any clearer for you, Councillor?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Yonkers?
Thank you, Worship. Question through the chair. I'm not sure if Ms. Wade or Mr. Surgeon or possibly Mr. Thomas hiding back there in the corner has a traffic analysis. I didn't find that in here at all. Maybe I was mistaken and read over it. Has there been a traffic impact analysis done here?
through the worship to Councilor Weber, there has not been one done for this. Overall, when the resort originally was done, that was considered as part of the planning tools within the MDA. But we went through it and in consultation with Mr. Thomas about whether there was any, and I'm make sure I use my engineering term right, any negative impact as a result of the hotel. And basically, there was looking at, do you want to go through this actually, Daniel?
Sure, yeah.
You're probably more familiar with it, but we've got a list of things of why there's no TIA.
TIAs address the movement of vehicles, and then they also address conflict. And so the movement of vehicles in this case is established through rezoning and road dedication, so the road is as it is. The development permit doesn't encompass off-site works. There will be a works and services agreement for the building to connect to sewer, water, and do boulevard improvements and construct letdowns. But we're not talking about off-site changes to road layout. We looked at things like the number of entrances and whether or not there was any anticipated pedestrian conflicts. We didn't see that. There's a separated pedestrian access that crosses on a crosswalk that's off-site. It's across the street. There's not a lot of anticipated vehicle conflict. We've got loading zones with trucks that are coming from the other direction. So that's just a quick summary. There's an overhead walkway accommodating pedestrians.
Possibly.
So, possibly, yes. So we didn't see the need to impose a TIA based on our judgment of perceived need, and that's where it was left.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Cross?
Just following up on that, and I have other questions, Your Worship, but I'm just following on Councillor Yonker's point. It seems to me like I go up there and ski, there's a lot of traffic. And we're going to add a lot of beds and a lot more traffic. And the bigger plan is even more traffic. So can you elaborate for me why you don't see the need to do a traffic study at this time?
I think on top of what I said, there's minimum conflict anticipated. And then beyond that, there isn't a guideline in the development permit for offsite traffic improvements. So it would be beyond our scope to ask for that. Aside from issues such as the number of entrances on the site, and say they didn't include their service delivery as a separate entrance, and they wanted to deliver through the port cochere. And we might have said, how's this going to work? How many deliveries a day are you going to have, and how many pedestrians are going to be leaving? What's that going to look like? But they've separated them, so it wasn't needed.
Councillor Yonkers.
Thank you, Worship. Through the chair, sorry, Mr. Surgeon, I just wanted to clarify. You were saying that, and maybe I misunderstood you, so I want to clarify. It's beyond your, as in city staff, scope to ask for a TA, traffic impact analysis, as part of a development permit requirement?
That's correct. In this case, based on these guidelines.
Based on these guidelines of which, sorry?
In the zoning bylaw.
In the zoning bylaw to this particular property. Okay, and then further to that, if I may ask another question, Your Worship. So, I believe I understand now, Ms. Wade, about the MDA and the zoning here. So just a question then about the OCP. It talks about, I've read all these emails, and as I'm sure council has, in regards to concerns and proponents and opponents to the project. And one big concern that I've heard from actually several people in the community is about property values possibly decreasing with such a large building being close up among the certain property values. And the OCP specifically talks about council making authority to ensure that property values do not decrease. Is that not referenced in here as part of the OCP? That wouldn't affect this at all if this is zoning under the OCP?
So, through your worship, dealing with property values is something that is not something that we do as in the OCP or the zoning. Like property values, that is more of a, how would I say it? It's everybody has a different opinion on property values and how they work and all that. So I'll give you a case in point. Affordable housing, for example. There's always been a lot of comments made about that if you put in an affordable housing project, your property values will decrease, and that has not been substantially proven in any research or methodology. So there's nothing we would do in relation to that, because that is very subjective, and that's a kind of not something that we would do or consider, because we're not legally, like, we have to look at zoning and land use within the framework.
I believe Councillor Yonker was referring to an actual line in our OCP. Do we have that reference handy?
Yes.
Just where it says that we have an obligation to ensure development does not impact property values negatively?
Through your worship, that's what I was asking. Is section 6.2 of the zoning bylaw requires that council has due regard when considering the conservation of property values. My question was just whether or not staff...
Have you thought about that liability?
Well, yeah, my question is just whether or not staff believe that part of the OCP is relevant in this decision here.
I would think that in regards to that would be us looking at it in a marketing point of view and looking at, what is that all about? And I don't know that that's the correct interpretation of that. And I'd be happy to get you a correct interpretation with that and dealing with that, and I pass that along. But we don't look at, property values is it's a big red herring, and it's not something like planners aren't supposed to kind of go down that whole evaluation of property values and increase, decrease, that kind of thing. So
I understand the sentiment.
So before you go on, Councillor Cross, I do want to make a statement. When we're talking about a development permit, we're looking at the objective facts in front of us, according to our zoning and according to our bylaws. When we're talking about property values, now we're looking at subjective. And subjective is, hang on, Councillor Yonkers. Subjective is opinion. And so I'm not saying that you're wrong in questioning that. What I'm saying is that it's dependent upon whose valuation are we looking at. So this property that you're questioning, they might be thinking that their property value is going down. Other people might be thinking that because this is now a newer development on the ski hill, that their property value is going up. So it kind of, I'm not sure which way you go with that. So, Councillor Yonkers.
Yeah, Your Worship, thank you. Just to clarify, I'm not asking staff here to make a decision on whether or not they believe property values are going to go down or not. My question is that if staff believe this piece relevant, 6.2 of the zoning bylaw, is relevant to this development permit, it's just a yes or no, which my understanding is no, it's not. I'm not asking about values, just to clarify.
Mr. Sturgeon.
I want to add to the conversation that land value is a socioeconomic impact, largely, and one that's associated with land use. And we're not talking about land use nor land use change today. We're talking about the development permit. So with that, I'm going to look into this, but I think we'll be getting you an answer after the fact. The answer right now is no.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
There's probably a time element involved in that as well. Right. So it's difficult. But my question is more on the process of development permit. I think that you submit a development permit, it goes to the planning department, they get reviewed, get all the stipulations that are required as it match the zoning. You do your investigation, and then it comes to the APC committee. They get their approval, and then it comes to council for their input on the process. I think during that run through, all the requirements, all the extra are added to the equation. And you would say, is the concept fit what we're looking for, what the city wants? Once you've done that, and you've laid out all the stipulations, why would you say, I'm going to the principal issue. We've done it in principle. That to me is done. It then say, you need to, coming back later and saying, adding extra qualifications down the road seems like it's another stall, another delay in our building process. And my comment is, we've done it. We're at the principle now, and now we're laying out what needs to go in so we can get into the building permit. And that's, I'm just curious whether that's... So,
you mind if I just go through that? So, part of this principle process was I had a conversation with the proponent and said we would like to see this go forward to council. And then there was other things that needed to be added. So without having to delay them and say, well, we haven't got everything ready, we can't go to council yet, the decision was made to come in principle to actually have the conversation that we're having and see where we're going with this and see how everybody feels about it and make comment and address concerns. And then at that point, we're going to be able to go back to the proponent and say, okay, here's where we're at. These are the things that we need. The council's now understanding the concept of what you're trying to do. And so that decision might have been partially mine. So whether that's wrong or not wrong, it was something that the development people had put together and basically said, okay, yeah, we're ready, we're not ready, and so here we are. So whether that's a proper way of doing it or not a proper way of doing it, it's not definitely my decision that we're here and, okay, this is what we need to go through. But in conversation, we ended up here. So now that we're here, we're in principle. We want to see what you feel if we're doing the right thing. So Mr. Sturgeon and then Councillor Ron.
Through your worship, one of the reasons for coming here is because we have systematically gone through the application. We wanted to provide where we are in the process and where we are in meeting all the legislative requirements within the design guidelines, that we've been talking with the applicant, and we have identified these reports that we still need from a technical point of view in order to move forward with the development permit conditions. And so this is an opportunity to have a discussion about that so that the applicant can hear council's comments and staff can hear those comments, and we can then take that back as we finalize the reports with the applicant and get the technical information so that we can then put it into the development permit. So, and I would just say it's not uncommon with major projects like this to come forward to council to have that discussion with council so that it's not just left, you know, long ways down the road. We realize it's been a year and we wanted to bring it forward. We understand where the resort is, where the community is, and this is a systematic approach to getting comments from council in regards to the application so we can better inform moving forward with reports.
Councillor Ryan.
So there seems to be obviously some concern over what accepting this development permit in principle involves. Because if council wanted, and correct me if I'm wrong, they could just defer this until those outstanding reports are complete, right? They could just say, we're not comfortable, these are important. Like, is that an option? Obviously, if we voted in the majority were against.
Mr. Chabot, do you want to weigh in on that?
You could, Your Worship. If I were the applicant, I'd be concerned about tepid support, given the cost of these reports likely involved.
Absolutely, and that was actually going to be my point, because personally I completely understand why they want that certainty and our support so that they can get those outstanding reports, which obviously are expensive, and so they can line up contractors and all that good stuff, so it helps them move the project forward. My question is there any way, I know we can't make them commit to staff accommodation, but from personally, I would feel a lot more comfortable supporting this and saying, okay, yeah, you have all these reports that are going to be very expensive for you, and you've already told us you're going to do staff accommodation. I know we can't make them, but is there any way we can sort of like meet in the middle? Is that a compromise, or am I way offside?
I think it would be outside of the scope of your authority for the consideration of issuance of a development permit. Yeah. They make a complete application, they meet the guidelines, they get your permit, they get the permit. And so now you're tying it to something that's ancillary or additional to or beyond the guidelines and the objectives of the OCP and the zoning. I understand your
it just seems like a compromise that's just like everybody wins, you know? It's like
Councillor
Crowder, can I get Councillor Crowder, or do you want to answer that further?
Your Worship, if I could just to Mr. Chabot's comment, the provision of employee housing in our OCP is triggered at 1,200, then there's the MDA. My understanding in talking with the resort and with the province is that with the DP for this hotel conference center, there would be employee housing falling out of this in line with the conversations that the resort is having with the province. And I think they understand the need for employee housing, and I'm just noting over to make sure that we're all aligned. So we're good.
Councillor Cross.
I believe we heard that. So I would suggest, I'd like to table that we add a motion to add a condition to the conditions in this motion, if that makes any sense.
I don't think we're at that.
Yeah, you're correct. We're not quite at that point. Number 2 is consideration for subjects, but number 1 is a separate
discuss your condition?
Sure.
Councilor Cross?
Yes, I was just going to suggest that we add a condition that the resort agrees in writing with reasonable covenant attached to present a DP application to the city for staff housing build by September 30th, 2019.
I'm not sure, I think.
I would think that would be a separate motion not related to the development permit application.
Okay. So I have a different question.
Okay.
Can I just add to yours, though?
Okay, Councilor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on that comment there, Mr. Chabot, so with that being said then, that would be and my understanding of just speaking with Ms. Wade here about the lack of a delegation bylaw in Revelstoke, that would be something that would be possibly a separate motion though to direct or delegate staff to sit at the table with representatives of RMR to discuss staff housing then. That would be a completely separate motion.
Yeah, I don't know the particulars of the motion that Councilor Cross wants to make, but if council were, as a result of such a motion being approved, and it not coming to fruition, not approve the development permit before council this evening, you could likely expect a claim for improper purpose or bad faith decision making.
Right, absolutely. So that's why I'm asking, would it be more appropriate for a separate motion? Because Mr. Nielsen had indicated and has over the last few days that RMR seems to be more than willing to engage with the city to coming to an agreement about submitting a DP on staff housing.
Yeah, you have limited authority to ask for things beyond the objectives and the guidelines and the requirements in your development permit.
Right, so this would be a separate motion.
And even under a separate motion, you might not have the ability to ask for those things, demanding that be done, that they build it according to...
Not demanding anything, asking about a conversation. So maybe then that would be a conversation that council could have with our corporate administrator to go over the possibilities of that motion then at a separate time. Pardon?
Yeah.
Thank you, Worship.
Yeah. Councilor Cross.
Completely different question. And through you, Your Worship, to Ms. Wade, what do you think the difference in timeline is to RMR in terms of being able to break ground by us approving in principle or not? And relative to a regular DP application where it doesn't say approved in principle?
I think that we've had discussions with the applicant about what does it look like moving forward, and that this provides them, to what Mr. Chabot had said, and some level of comforts about moving forward with the reports that they need to do to finalize. And we have set up regular meetings with RMR to move forward with what they need to do in regards to moving into like a building permit and those sorts of things. So we've had those discussions with them, and I believe I have looked at a timeline to move forward with that, should this go forward with council.
If council decides to reject this and not pass the motion, what are the next moves for RMR?
I would say that first of all, under the local government, if you reject it, there's a section in the Local Government Act that says that they must wait 6 months before the development permit could be heard again.
Okay, so that's the point I wanted to raise. So if we're only doing in principle, why does that section of the act apply? Because we're not actually rejecting the development permit, we're only rejecting a principle. And this is why I have huge issues with this whole in principle thing in the first place. It doesn't seem to serve us well, it doesn't seem to serve the impact on people around it well, it doesn't seem to serve RMR well.
Through your worship, I think that what we've done is bring forward something in principle, which is not uncommon for councils to consider, especially with major development applications. And it allows the applicant to hear the discussion and understand what is going on in the community and how we as staff work with the applicant to move forward with the concerns that council is raising.
So, carry on, Ms. Wade.
No,
I'm going to make a comment on you now.
And so then we realize that we don't have all the reports finalized, and that's why we're bringing it, because it's been a year. We want to bring this forward. We want to inform council where we're at, and we think it's good to have the discussion, and the in principle allows the applicant and staff to hear the concerns of council so we can finalize reports and move it forward.
So in answer to your question, Mr. Cross, when we're talking about if this was turned down, the ultimate decision would be up to RMR, but quite likely they could say, no, we're not going to develop at all. We're going to walk away. And that would be tragedy. However, having said that, we're finally seeing some movement with RMR. They're coming to us. They're probably the only, can I carry on or would you like to interrupt? Okay, they're probably one of the only companies in North America that's actually putting a full service hotel on a mountain that's not a condo development where they're selling. So they're taking a chance on doing that, but they do hotels. That's what their company is versed in. So by going in principle, that allows them to see that we as a council are looking at it and saying, okay, if you do all these reports, then probably there's a good likelihood that we're going to put through the DP. And if they do all the reports from a legal standpoint, that's our obligation because that's the law under the zoning. But if we turn this down now, they are able to say, why spend money on Revelstoke? So then we don't get that staff housing and we don't get that. And is that all contingent? I'm just giving you what could happen. That's the worst case scenario. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but quite possibly that they could say, you know what, we've had enough.
So, Your Worship, just to follow on that line of questioning, I'd like through you to ask Mr. Nielsen a question,
Sure.
if I might. Peter, it is my impression that an in-principle DP here does not serve RMR well, and I'd like your thoughts on that.
I mean, we've struggled to understand what that means, but I think some clarification is certainly going to like. And approval in principle is a lot better than the alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Charlotte?
I'd like to just voice that I appreciate this coming to us in principle. Having watched city council meetings in the past, when large projects come up, I was terrified about being brought blindsided, essentially having had no discussion on this. And we've seen this with some larger proposals where it comes to council at the last minute and then some other ideas are brought forward, but it's so late in the game at that point, it's hard to apply back. So I really do appreciate seeing this process coming to us at a midway point because it is a larger proposal. What I would like to ask is, does our planning department hopefully, or what do they intend with other development permits, especially the larger ones we know are on the plate? Is this going to be part of how we move forward in the future?
I'm going to ask for Ms. Wade to weigh in on that, but I don't think that's a done deal, that this is going to be every way that we bring this forward. But Karen.
Yep, through your worship, yeah. The planning department is quite open to bringing something before council in regards to our development permit process. And we'd be happy to have that discussion with council about that, with what we can do within our legal rights. Right. And we'd be happy to bring something back in regards to that, if that's council's so wish.
Councilor Brooks Hills and Councilor Youngers.
So I have quite a few different points, but I agree with Councillor Charlotte that for this project, now that I understand this process in principle or in principle process, it makes a lot of sense to me. And having seen some of these other large developments, the new whichever hotel on the highway, and they feel they get blindsided at the end because it's like, okay, well, we approve it, but now we want you to redo all of these things. I feel there's some validity to approving it in principle and these conditions which were going to be met anyways, but at this point, council can throw out other ideas, other things that we want to see, and then at the end of the day, at one meeting in principle, we could approve the whole project. Having said that, I have a lot of difficulties with this project for a few reasons. If you look at it, but try to look at it fairly and equitably and take the people out of it, and just think, you know, person X, person Y. Person X bought land with the idea of the MDA and the OCP, whereas person, I can't remember X or Y, has land that's zoned for this development. So I can see how both sides feel that they have a right to enjoy that. And I feel that the city back in 2003 or whatever have let both people down. And that's unfortunate. And obviously I don't blame any particular person in the city. That was, probably their error at that time. It's hard to predict what's going to happen 15 years later. And so, I've struggled with this a lot, but I believe I could approve this in principle today.
Okay. Councillor Yonkers, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and that's great points, Councillor. Just one so far for now. One more question. Just again, clarification here, Ms. Wade or Mr. Sturgeon. It's the staff's view and the planning department's view that regardless of whether or not the province upholds or says no to the RMR's MDA update, that the zoning is still here, which would allow this hotel to be built here, regardless of the decision that the province makes. Am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
I think my real issue is in principle, because in principle, I think we should be as clean as possible going through the building process. We should have an identified stream through the system. You come in with an idea, you review it, you make sure it works on the land, you give in the stipulations, we review it, the ABC reviews it, all laid out, then you address those as a developer. And then they come back to the building department. And once those things are addressed, I think leaving the door open for additions along the line doesn't enhance our reputation as a community, as a business, as a development-friendly community. I think the more we continue to do this is a new game in principle. This is a total brand new. Where did that come from? I don't know, but it's a new step in the game, and I don't know if we want to put it in because there's other things coming. I think we should just identify what the development permit means, what it's supposed to do, put the stipulations on it, take it to the next. Once that's been addressed, move on to the next level. And that should be clear to everyone coming into our town.
Okay, so your point's taken. But we're here at this point now. So we need to deal with this point now that we're in principle. Councillor Yonkers,
Your Worship, if I might, just to Councillor Elliott, I hear what you're saying, and I would just suggest that my understanding, not at this point, because I believe any motions have to be made at point 2, if I'm correct. Ms. Lowe, you were saying the second there, any motions? Or conditions, right. But I believe you would be possibly making a motion to amend then to remove the in principle, if you so chose to make that motion.
My amendment would be that accept the development permit as it is with the addition of staff housing.
So I would ask, are you making that motion?
I don't know if that was possible.
before you even get there, are we at a legal point where we can do that?
To have staff housing as a requirement?
No.
To change this to a DP and accept this as a DP?
You don't have the necessary reports as recommended by staff that inform conditions that should be part of the issuance of the development permit and any associated land use covenants such as the restriction on use of the loading hour for hours and things, right?
So that's why we're here with this in principle. We can't change that.
Criteria are not outlined in this stage?
The reports that we provided are, but what the recommendations come back and what council and its discretion feels is necessary or appropriate is a decision that council has to make in the future. So we can't delegate that to staff to exercise the discretion. They can't.
We're asked to approve the concept, the principle of the idea.
So then they can go and do all this work.
But that's what a development permit is supposed to do.
Yes, but we're not at that point.
Confuse me.
So,
Mr. Sturgeon, this way.
If I could help through your worship, the planning process is an iterative process. And before an application comes in, you have a pre-application meeting, and then they make the application, and then they invest in a set of drawings, and then we look at it, and we ask for a whole bunch of clarification. And then they go back, and then they bring that back to us. That might take 6 weeks. And then we do a more comprehensive review. And this goes back and forth for a while. And then it gets to a point where, okay, we've done all this. We want some certainty moving forward, right? the reports that we've asked for may or may not change what's here. So now there's an opportunity to say, is there any other changes based on these guidelines we have in front of us to coincide with that? So this is a way of adding certainty and clarity to the applicant to move ahead. On top of that, they want to start mobilizing for their building permit. So that requires a finalization of all their drawings for that. They got to arrange construction crews. They want to know that they can make this construction season, and they've committed to us that they're going to provide all these reports within a matter of weeks. But they want to begin that process, and so this will allow them to move forward and to know if there's any other concerns that council might have while they go through this round of final changes.
Councilor Ryan?
I know I mentioned it before, but I think if this, in principle, is to ensure that they get more certainty and clarity, I feel that there should be some way that we can get some certainty and clarity that they would provide for staff accommodation. And I know that it's not, we legally can't make them. I understand that. And we could get sued. But we legally also don't have to accept this in principle. So, like, why can't we just meet in the middle? What am I missing?
The legalities.
So we get sued. Aren't we insured? It's like $10,000.
So I want to make this real clear to you, because Councillor Cross had asked this question: what's the worst case scenario?
Right.
We have a $20 to $30 million hotel project going up on RMR.
And I like that.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
for it.
Good. I'm glad you like that. Because if you say no to this, and I'm giving you the worst case scenario, and they say, screw it, we're walking. Now they're not doing any development. You're not getting your housing.
And the ski lines will be fewer.
And then you're not saying any further development. Okay, so that's the point I'm trying to make. You wanted to know what the worst case scenario is. We cannot tie one obligation, if it's not in our legal realm, and you know that it's not now in your legal realm. Not only can
I understand.
So no, I want to make this real clear. And so if it's not in our legal realm, and we go ahead and you tie that to, and you've been explained that that's not your legal way of doing it, you personally can be liable, in addition to the city. So now that goes to you personally. Ms. Wolf, sorry.
Your Worship, I'm not sure I'm trying to find a solution, but what I'm thinking is if we went through this development permit and read it as is, and approved it or didn't approve it, whatever it comes to, if there's a resolution that needs to come forward that council encourages staff to continue discussions about staff housing in relation to this development permit, that's totally fine.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Can't order.
No, I understand that. I totally understand that. Okay, thank you.
That's fine after.
Okay, great.
It can be tied to this permit.
Yes, I understand. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Youngers, then Councillor Chalette, then Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Worship. Again, I just wanted to clarify my understanding when Councillor Elliott was speaking that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Elliott, that he was possibly considering the removal of principle, but not just approving, but it was still going to be subject to all the following reports that are already listed in here. Further to that, Your Worship, I just wanted to comment, because we had an open table here, that I believe Mr. Niels, RMR's architect, had his hand up wanting to speak.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Sorry, I forgot your name, sorry.
Mr. Kwasny.
If we can allow him to speak.
Sure, Mr. Kwasny, if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Your Worship, members of council, obviously I'm the architect for this project. I do 95% of Northwood's development permit and building documentation for all their hotels across North America and in the UK. This process of going through the development permit, OCP, all of that process, I'm very familiar with. I have to admit, this session right here, approval in principle, is the first time we have ever hit this. I also want to point out, two of the criteria that are on the conditions, we were just made aware of about 2 weeks ago. So that's frustrating. It's a reality. We will do what's required to get that done. My experience with these subject twos is they're typically left to staff to work with the applicant to resolve the issues and based on the recommendations of the professionals. We're 100% aligned with that. We will do that. This approval in principle is very odd. That's really,
Thank you for your opinion.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Ms. Wade?
Yeah, I'll just respond to that. Approval in principle has been used throughout the province of BC as a way to have a dialogue. And so I think it's shows best practices, and that's what we're doing today. And it allows the application that's before and been here for a year to come forward for the applicant to hear what council is thinking. And the requirements in there are all legislated through the development guidelines. And so I do want to say that we've been in conversation with the resort, and I feel comfortable moving forward with them in a collaborative manner.
So, Councillor Yonkers, you want to finish your question?
Your Worship, yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wade. And my actual question was just going to be from Ms. Lowe after I noticed his hand was up. Okay. So just on the topic of the resolution that you had proposed to Councillor Ryan there, would that resolution need to be brought forward today at the end of the meeting by a councillor, or is that a separate? So I'm asking, would you be able to advise us when the appropriate time of that would be?
Yeah, it just would not be in relation to this development permit. It would just be a resolution.
So once these are accepted or denied,
yeah.
If you just can remind, because the procedures are still new. Thank you.
Councillor Schuett.
So yeah, as we're learning, and I think what I'm curious about is maybe just the procedure on this, where when a development permit, whether it's in principle or in reality, comes to council. From what I do remember from our training, there are only certain things that we can deny it for. So if we could just have a little bit of clarification, just to remind us all why we would be allowed to say no, and maybe some does that, or why, because I want to say yes, I guess as far as things go, but just a little bit of clarification on that just from the discussion we've been having so far.
Maybe you want to bring up the slide with the three guidelines in the development permit area? Environment, protection of the natural environment, and form and character.
And we just see the conversation going away from those points, and that's why I wanted to bring us back to that. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, I was not signaling that I was going to say no. I just wanted to.
So I'll let you two, if you have anything to say, you guys
Thank you. Councillor Brooks Hills has a question. Is it related to this, or can we have Mr. Sturgeon to respond to Ms. Chalette's comment?
You can say no, but it's a no with conditions.
Right.
Okay, and you have to confine that consideration to the guidelines that are included in the CDO 8 zone. If you're not reasonably satisfied that it meets those guidelines. Okay, so we provided you with an interpretation of that. That's our interpretation. You have different minds, right? And guidelines are subjective in nature, okay? And so if you do that, you have to give some clear instructions as to how they're going to need to meet those guidelines. And then we move forward.
Okay, Councillor Birchall.
Just surrounding this idea of trying to obligate RMR to build staff housing, and I understand that would be great, but that we can't do it. However, it should be noted, this is the first time since RMR existed that they're talking about building staff housing. They're talking about not clear dates. You know, the project hasn't gone that far forward, but they're talking about it clearly, and I consider that to be a huge positive. And I'm choosing to believe them that this is happening.
That's across.
I would echo that. I tend to believe it's going to happen. Michael, Councillor Brookshill. So my question, Your Honor, is regarding the form and character aspect and how and staff's interpretation of that in regard to the impact on the local property. I remain morally conflicted here, and all my work in the ethics field for 5 years as CEO of the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Corporate Policy tells me one thing about this situation. We may be making a jurisdictional decision, we may be making a right decision from a procedure point of view, but fundamentally, the impact on their property with the change in the MDA is a moral bankrupt decision. And I want to understand what your thinking is on that, and whether you think we as a municipality have a right to protect citizens from this sort of thing.
To your worship.
Go ahead, Ms. Wade.
So the way the MDA is laid out allows for flexibility. And when the zoning was created, and created on private lands, it outlined a range of permitted uses. So those permitted uses go from townhouse to hotel and conference center. Those are the permitted land uses, and they marry with the MDA that the resort has entered into with the province for the idea of tourism and commercial recreation, etc. So the MDA is pretty clear about the intent of the lands and the flexibility, and it'll move around with the market. So the OCP guides those permitted uses, and the resort has decided that the previous townhouse application was not doable from their perspective and has the right under the zoning to actually move forward with the hotel and conference center. And they also have that ability under the MDA. So from a staff's perspective, we are following the zoning because that's what their legal entitlements are.
Thank you for that, and just reinforces what I'm saying is we have a procedural justification for doing this. We don't have a moral reason.
But Councillor Cross, we do have a moral obligation to RMR to uphold the legal right of their ability to bring development permit.
Absolutely, Your Worship, and that's my other problem with this, is on the other side of my coin, the in-principle thing drives me crazy. If we want RMR to go ahead, let's just get them going. So I just have a whole problem with this whole process. It's nuts to me, quite frankly.
Sure, and that's noted. Any other questions or concerns that you would like to bring up with Ms. Wade or Mr. Sturgeon? So before us is a motion to bring this forward, approve this in principle, and then there's a second motion, final consideration be subject to the following. So there is a list of items here. So when we talk about going forward with this, Councillor Cross, you had talked about earlier to Mr. Nielsen regarding your ability to sit down with him and Ms. Bowen and work something out.
Yes, sure.
So I don't want that to be part of this principle, but I want to note that because that might be part of your moral and ethical way of dealing with it. And I'm talking about you in particular. I'm not talking about you, Councillor Cross. I'm talking about you, Stephen Cross, the person. And I want to distinguish between that because I do not want this council tied to those negotiations, because I don't want it to be limited or now limit our ability to make decisions as a council, but also as a corporation. If you're comfortable with doing those things, I have no reservation about that when you're doing it personally. Now, having said that, I may be on the line for making that statement from a legal standpoint. However, I'm prepared to stand behind what I say. So, if you're prepared to do, I'll get to you in a minute, Councillor Yonkers. If you're prepared to do that, I don't want that to be subject to this, but that in good faith says that you will work out something between RMR and Ms. Bowen. It may not be to the resolution of either party, but you may be able to come to a compromise. So part of that is our staff have taken it upon themselves. They've noted Ms. Bowen's concerns, and Ms. Bowen first started communicating with me about her concerns in probably the summer of 2018. So the staff have taken into some of her concerns, or most of her concerns, and try to mitigate those by tree plantings and things like that. It's not going to be a perfect world. I'll get you to speak in a moment, Ms. Wood. It's not a perfect world, but it's better than it was. And the reason I say it's better than it was because those issues weren't considered prior to Ms. Bowen bringing forward her concerns, because we weren't aware of her concerns. So now that we're aware of her concerns and we're dealing with it as best as we can, it's incumbent upon us to look at this and say, okay, what's the best way forward? So you've given an alternative to meet with both of them to come up with some things. Now, that's not going to be conditional on the building of this building.
Understood.
Right? As long as you're clear on that, it's not conditional on that. So Councilor Yonkers, I'll get you to speak.
Your Worship, thank you. First of all, thank you, Your Worship, for that summary. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Just on that point, whatever Councillor Cross wants to do in his own time, that's his right to do. But, and no offense and disrespect, but myself and a council, we represent the electorate and the city of Revelstoke as a whole. And from my standpoint as a councillor, can I get reassurance or something? I know Councillor Cross had mentioned signing an affidavit. With all due respect, can we ensure that legally this is dealt with to make sure that the city of Revelstoke is not held to this? And that's my due diligence as an elected official as the city of Revelstoke, that we will have nothing to do with this.
Yes. And so what happens is the city of Revelstoke's not going to pay for an affidavit being drawn up.
Right. Oh, I just want to ensure that we are
legal.
To do that.
Okay, that's something that, you know, that they can do, but I appreciate.
I just want to make sure the city's protected here.
So, Your Worship, I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Yonker, and I am actually very concerned about offering personal support while you're sitting at the council table. Councillor Cross, I believe that when you're at the council table, you are part of the council. So I would expect that you would be a councillor at the council table.
I am being a councillor.
That is my concern.
And I am
when you
helping.
offer up personal.
So noted. Thank you for your opinion, and I will continue to counsel as I
So, Ms. White, did you have anything further that you would like to add?
I just wanted to add that in regards to the treatment of the rear of the building, that the resort has been working with staff to mitigate that with the concerns that they've heard. And so I just wanted to compliment the resort and working with staff in addressing that, and I think that's important to note, just so that point isn't missed.
Okay. Any further statements or comments from councillors? You're comfortable, you've got the information that you need, you understand what the ramifications are. Mr. Chabot, anything further?
No, Your Worship.
Councillor Elliott has
Councillor Elliott?
So the resort, they take this as saying, we have it in principle. They go back and deal with the criterion. They come back again for the development permit approval. Is that the process that we're hearing?
Yep.
So the assurances are pretty close. If they can add some comments about the staff accommodation and address all those other issues, then we're on path to have it approved. Is that right?
So the staff accommodation is not part of this motion, and it's not going to be made part of their criteria. If one of you want to put another motion on after we deal with this, stating that staff can have conversations with them, that's basically just bringing it forward. It's not forcing RMR to have the conversations with staff or staff reverse. It's basically saying this is what council would like to see. RMR has already stated that they're going in conjunction to this while they have their construction staff on, so they put the foundation in here, they'll move over, put the foundation in. I don't know, that's a technical term, but those are the sorts of things that they basically indicated that they're willing to do, and it makes perfect sense from a financial perspective going forward for them. Councillor Yonkers.
Thank you, Worship. With the comment you made there, and with all due respect to yourself and RMR, there's been a lot of things said over the past 10 years and a lot of things not done or have been done. So while I do personally believe as well that they'll live up to their word, I take it with a grain of salt. So I think that resolution also needs to be looked at afterwards of any motion that's made here.
Well, that's something that you can bring on the table. When we deal with this, if you want to deal with that, then by all means.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Brooks Hill, did you have something further?
I was going to read the motion.
Awesome. So it is a long motion, but there is two parts to the motion. There is two parts. The first one is very short, and the second one is very long. So you can...
Are they separate, or...?
Yes.
Yes.
Third one, too.
And the third one,
That's why I volunteered.
I'm going to turn my page over to get to that part. So.
That's why I offered to read the first one.
All right. Councillor Brooks Hill, would you make the first motion?
That the application for DP 2018-01 be accepted in principle.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sherlatt. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Are you in favor? Okay, motion is carried. All right, so we're going to go on to part 2. Do you want to read that one too, Councillor Brooks Hill?
I will, but I think Don's going to give me a way.
You can word it, the resolution as in the
Move recommendation number 2 from the report regarding Revelstoke Alpine Village.
perfect wording. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So part 2, the final consideration of DP 2018-01 be subject to the following as outlined in the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Yonkers. Any discussion on that motion?
No S.
Pardon?
No S.
Yonkers. No S. Okay, I got all kinds of S's. Councillor Yonker.
Younger, but yes.
Yonker? Okay, I'll get it right. I got another almost 4 years. Councillor Yonker, thank you for seconding that. Is there any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Motion number 3. Somebody want to read that forward? Councillor Brooks Hill, you want to read that one as well?
The staff be directed to revise the draft development permit to incorporate conditions resulting from the above studies and to prepare any necessary covenants.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Yonker. You got it right?
Good job.
Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Now, further to that, Councillor Yonker, you wanted to bring forward a motion dealing with
The staff housing?
the staff housing.
Yeah, Your Worship, I just would like to put a motion on the table that council direct staff or the planning department, whichever it needs to be staff, to engage in communication with R&R about bringing forward staff housing as soon as feasibly possible, or a development permit in regards to staff housing.
Okay. Is that a good motion? Is that clear to you, Cindy, regarding that? Okay. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Ryan. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Yonker.
Your Worship, I'd just like to add to the RMR representatives, and I believe Mr. Brownlee is actually here. He was never introduced by Mr. Nielsen, but just like to thank you, and hopefully, Mr. Nielsen, you guys live up and engage with staff here to bring forward staff out and help the community help.
Start tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we still have that motion on the floor. We need to vote on that. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, where are we at? Correspondence. So 12A, we have a letter from the Revelstoke Cycling Association request trail funding. And it's just asking for us to refer that. Is there someone who would like to make that motion? Councillor Sherlatt.
The funding request from the Revelstoke Cycling Association dated December 27th, 2018 be referred to the Director of Community Economic Development for reference of other funding opportunities.
Is there a second for that motion? Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Yonker.
Yes, Your Worship. I just want to note to council here that I had a discussion earlier this afternoon just with Mr. Cooper, who I believe sits on the RCA, and I believe there was some confusion in regards to actually having a delegation presenting a business case in regards to their need for these funds or why they see fit for these funds. So I'm not sure if council feels it necessary to defer until the time that the delegation is presented, at which time possibly we look at then sending this off to Ms. Braun in Economic Development, or if council feels the need to just send this off to Ms. Braun as well. But I just felt the need, council should know that I believe there will be a delegation in regards to an actual business case of why.
Councillor Ryan is going to ask a question first.
I'm just wondering, is that how this, I don't know how this works. So it gets referred to the Director of Community Economic Development and then they decide yay or nay? Is that right?
Your Worship, the reason it was deferred, or is asking to be referred to the Economic Development Commissioner is because the cycling trails are outside city limits, but therefore they do qualify for other funding, and these are actually help them.
Did we not give funding last year though?
We did.
And they were still outside city limits?
No, some of them, it was pretty common, that interconnected commissions.
I gotcha.
So we were just looking for alternative ways to help them find funding. So we could do both.
Philosophically, the city has taken the approach that it's far happier to fund capital new infrastructure. Last year's funds, as Ms. Lowe notes, was for new trail construction.
Right.
We don't often get in the business of funding maintenance, which in turn often become employee salaries for these types of things. And that's just a philosophical approach. With the resort municipality initiative funding that is paid over to the province, and again, the province, there's a strong correlation towards capital infrastructure investment, not funding salaries. And so if we're going to give them the resort development strategy money to support their operation, they'd have to rejig their budget and how they were going to fund things and demonstrate that those funds are going to be used for capital instead of maintenance.
Right.
And that's what economic development can have those conversations with them.
So it's not saying they can't get those funds, it's just saying they could come from somewhere else.
Yeah, they may have to change their approach and make the request for their capital and fund their maintenance from another budget area that they may have.
And then they could come back to us with that proposal.
That's helpful. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Cross and Councillor Burkshill.
Just a comment, Your Worship, that I, for one, would like to see a delegation from the Cycling Association to the council to bring us up to date on their good activities and their state issues and problems so that we can learn or we can help them within the limits of our ability to do so.
Sure. So the counseling group can make application to become a delegation by going through Ms. Lowe at City Hall, and she'll go through the whole steps with them so that they can get on the agenda to come to us. So, Councillor Brooks.
I just want to say that what Mr. Chabot said is kind of exactly their point. They can get funding to build trails, and they're building trails, but they are really struggling to find funding to maintain those trails. And in some ways, it's a bit of an ethical dilemma, because if you just keep building trails, that's not as sustainable, or from an environmental standpoint or from a land use standpoint. If you just endlessly build trails, it just creates problems if they're never maintained.
I think I got into trouble as a kid doing that. Building trails and didn't maintain them.
Because you didn't ask Farmer John.
There we go. You're probably right. Any further discussion on this motion?
Well, I think it's a good point that he makes, is they're struggling to find that funding. But in their letter, they do comment that that's one of the things they're looking at is having user fees, because right now they're just free. Right. It's like if you have a bike and you fund a trail, go for it. So I don't think this is going to be funding a long-term position. From my understanding of their letter, it's kind of like we just need some help right now while the province and all these communities are struggling with the same issue until we find a solution, which it sounds like they're working hard at.
Yeah, and so when we talk about these sort of things, when we refer them to economic development to help them find that funding, then it's not on the taxpayer to pay for that, to pay for those wages, et cetera, that sort of thing. Councillor Burkshill.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to refer it to Ms. Braun for now, and if the RCA wants to do a delegation to council at that time, we can engage with them and talk about it some more.
Any other discussion on this motion? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any questions or on the monthly reports for the Aquatic Center coming into communications for December 2018? Any comments on bylaw compliance report for December 2018? No comments? Any questions from the press?
Not me.
Yeah, Your Worship, a two-part question. Jocelyn was saying that a letter was distributed to council at the start of the meeting, perhaps from a neighbor to the RMR Hotel. Is that correct? And the second part is, can I get a copy? And is that letter also going to be added to the record? And then the third part of that question is, Your Worship, you mentioned that you've been in discussion with this person since July of, or since the summer of this last year. Why was it not included in the agenda package prior to the meeting?
Because that was just me listening to her.
Okay.
Ms. Lowe.
Your Worship, to answer the other questions, yes, the late items were approved by council through resolution and will be included on the agenda tomorrow morning.
Will be included on the agenda. Is it possible to get a copy?
Correspondence.
Is it possible to get a copy of the letter today? No?
Sure, there's more than one. I can give you a copy.
Ms. Bowen, you're okay with us giving that copy of the letter? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, were you asking me a question?
No.
I was, but then I realized that you've given it to us, so now it becomes public document.
Oh, it does this time. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to see. Aaron, any further questions?
Your Worship, I just a follow-up regarding this. So apparently I've learned there's 5 different letters. There were several letters in support of the hotel development included in the package.
Correct.
These ones, I'm assuming, are all opposed to the development.
And they're late. They just came.
They came in after the deadline. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to call, can we move in camera pursuant to sections 90.1A, G, and J, 90.2B of the Community Charter? Councilor Brooks Hill, Councilor Juncker, all those in favor?